Okay, you guys. Thank you guys all so much for joining. This is Make Music Right's second ever webinar. The first one was with Five Times August, and the next one right now is with my dear friend Chad Prather. I am so happy Chad could be joining us today. He is a great musician, just an awesome person altogether, and he's got a great mind. So that's what I'm really excited about here. Is we're going to have a fantastic discussion. We're also joined by my co-founder and vice president of Make Music Right, Christopher Macchio, another great mind here on board. And I'm just so excited about having this discussion with you guys. We're going to get started. I'm going to give the floor over to Chris to kind of introduce Chad a little bit, and then Chad will share some more about himself.
Well, I just think Chad, of course, has been really making great commentary online, just kind of bringing some scripture into the dialogue in the discussion. And of course, he's a musician, a comedian. And actually, Chad, if you don't mind, can you just tell the folks that have joined us a little bit about your background and what the arc of your journey has consisted of?
Sure. It's good to be with you guys and appreciate both of you and want to say hello to everybody that is joining us. I love it when Chloe introduces me as a great musician, which is something 100% I am not. I've often said that if I can take enough of my skills that are all mediocre and I can pull them all together, it's a reasonably decent product. So I grew up in a family of musicians and I was the least musician of all of them. I also grew up in a family of cowboys, and I was the least cowboy of all of them, but I was the only person in my family that was able to take those two things and make any money from it. So sometimes it doesn't take all the talent in the world to be successful. Chris, to your point, I get to run my mouth for a living. I've always sort of been a person that looks at life and finds humor in it and tries to find creative ways to take common sense and wrap it in that humor and make it an easier pill to swallow. I've done television and radio, podcasting for a long, long time. I was on television for the first time when I was 3 years old. And, the world has sort of been an audience for me. I often joke that if I can get anybody to stand still or walk slow, I'll talk to them and tell them my philosophies of life. And the Lord has been gracious enough to give me a platform whereby I can continue to do that. So I'm a humorist, a comedian, a musician. I'm an author, a podcast host. I've done television. I've written a lot of music. I'm with a record label in Nashville. I've had some hit songs as well as some best selling books and a top ranked podcast for a lot of years. And so a lot of people have a hard time defining what it is that I do. I kind of do everything. I joke and say that I'm like a goose. I wake up in a new world every day. And if I had to do the same thing over and over again, I get bored with it. And if I'm not having fun doing it, then I don't want to do it. So that's why I try to, stick my toe in a little bit of everything when it comes to culture and art and philosophy and ideology. And because I think we need to be well-rounded in this culture that we're living in. Our society has lost its ability not only for common sense but critical thinking, and that's been a huge passion of mine over the years, to get us back to using our mind and embracing the arts and taking culture back and finding a foundation and a value system for it to be infused with that, because I think that's where the arts came from. And I think it's where we need to get them back to, which is why I appreciate you guys and your voice with Make Music Right.
Absolutely. Well, I will say
Wow.
Chad is also on Make Music Rights Advisory Board, which is an absolute honor for us to have him behind us on this whole journey here with our mission to foster a music culture in America that enriches and strengthens our society. And like Chad just kind of hinted at, we've lost a lot of that in our culture, that richness that America, once held in our culture. And I think it's really important to restore it, especially with music. And so it's so awesome having Chad on board. So I want to just kind of jump into some of our discussion points here. Chad, like I said, is a great mind, has so much amazing things to say here. So I want to kind of dive into the decline of morality. And if you haven't listened to Chad's podcast, it's really blown up recently. It's called Before the Noise. Comes on every morning. I believe it's on Rumble and YouTube, and it's just absolutely a breath of fresh air, an amazing way to start your day. And I'm not promoting this for any other reason than I just listened to it the other day, I think yesterday for the first time all the way through. And I was like, this is so well done. And so I would encourage anyone here to listen to that. It's just a great way to kind of get your day off to a start with a little bit of scripture and just some thoughts on, how we should be living our lives as, well, as Christians, if you are one, and just as individuals in that sense as well. So, the first question I have for Chad is just, the decline of morality in our mainstream music industry has shown devastating effects, I would say, on our nation. I don't just mean like, oh, an inappropriate comment here and there or a little bit of an edgy song. It's a matter of we've taken God completely out of everything we do when it comes to music, and we've replaced it with self and with actually an outright, I would say, disrespect of God, and instead said, hey, let's glorify Satan, let's glorify the things that we know are destructive to us, and see how that goes and watch the world burn. So, Chad, what are your thoughts on how this has been going across America?
Well, I think a lot of people marginalize the arts, particularly music and comedy, and so much of the written word, whether it's poetry or fill in the blank. We marginalize that and say that's a part of culture without realizing it's integral to culture. I believe that music was born in the heart of God. I don't think it can be born anywhere else because music requires order. It requires rhythm. It requires harmony and balance and melody and progression. And chaos can't produce melody. Random noise doesn't form a song. And so for something to resonate, it's got to be tuned. It was funny. We were laughing because
take that, Schoenberg.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it drove me crazy because we had the opening gala there at in New York for Make Music Right, and you guys asked me to come up on stage, and I was sort of pressed for time because Laura Trump was coming on stage, and I had a few minutes to speak, but then I was going to sing a song that we put out this year called "What Happened to That," which is a callback to the change of society. And I grabbed that little Taylor guitar to pick it up, and I was going to play it, and I didn't check the tuning on it. And I started playing it, and I go, this thing's out of tune. And like, I didn't say it. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to sing it, play it. And it frustrated me to hear that like that, but it had sat in the room and gotten out of tune. And, for something to resonate, it's got to be in tune. When something's out of tune, it's wrong. And America's gotten out of tune. We've gotten out of tune with the rhythm of God. And if you're going to tune something up, it requires a standard. And I've often debated with people who say they don't believe in God. I say, well, you can't use my vocabulary then. Like, you can't talk about good and evil. You can't tell right from wrong, because if you can't tell good without a standard, and the standard has to be God. That's true in music. It's true in the arts. It's true in balance. It's true in color. It's true in nature. It's true in all of the aesthetics. We interpret beauty like physical beauty. You look at a man or a woman that's a model, and you say that's a beautiful person. Well, the reason there's beauty is because there's balance. If there's that current show that's out, I've seen the images from it on Netflix, and I'm not a subscriber to Netflix because of its crazy ideologies. But I've seen, you'd have to be blind to not see culturally that Monsters deal, the story of Ed Gein, who was the serial killer back in the 1940s in Wisconsin. And they purposefully took a guy, Charlie Hunnam, who is known as sort of like that heartthrob type actor from Sons of Anarchy, and they purposefully made his eyes look different directions. They kind of made him out of balance. They made his face look kind of monstrous, right? See, that's what society is doing right now with music and the arts. Is it really wants to extract God or any sense of values or standard from it. And so if they can take it out of balance and create this cacophony of noise, then it becomes something that is completely anti-life. It's anti-balance. It's anti-rhythm. And I look back at the scriptures, and I remember the tribes of Israel. One was the Levites. They were the ones that were set apart by God to be the ones who were in charge of the tabernacle worship. And many of them were established to sing or to play instruments. And if you go back and look at the history of the Levites, they actually built their instruments to play in the tabernacle. The significance to that is it was one thing to be a master at an instrument, but they wanted to know the heart and soul of the instrument. So they were actually required to build their own instruments. because they needed to know the inner workings of it, right? So the Psalms talks about how David, who was a psalmist, obviously a songwriter, and he played before God, how there were instruments that David created because they didn't exist. And he created something that would reflect his heart to God, because he had this sound in his heart that wasn't, there was no instrument, right? You go in the music room, there's no instrument that makes that sound. So he created the instrument to make it. Pretty profound when you think about it. But what's even more profound is when you get over to 1 Peter 2:9, where he says that you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own peculiar people that were created, called out of darkness into his marvelous light, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you. So that's a callback to the Levites. That's a callback to the Davidic praise in the Psalms. You're called to proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his light. So basically what that's saying, like David looked in his arsenal of instruments and said, I don't have anything that'll make that sound. God looked in the earth and said, there's a sound I want to make. I'm not making, there's not an instrument to make that sound. So God says, I'm going to create Chloe Castillo, or I'm going to create a Christopher Macchio. I'm going to create a Chad Prather. I'm going to create someone that can make that sound, because they're going to be my instrument to proclaim that praise. And see, our music, our artistry has to be a reflection of that. It has to be in rhythm. And sometimes that rhythm includes some minor chords. Sometimes it's some discordant deals that just, that are hard to play or difficult to hear, but it's all in the soundtrack of God. I was giving a keynote speech years ago, and I had the audio guy play some soundtracks from some movies. And I said, all right, play the first clip. And he played Star Wars. Everybody recognizes Star Wars, right? And then he played Raiders of the Lost Ark. Everybody cried out, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then I had him play the Jaws theme. And I said, all right, what's that? And they said Jaws. And this could go on. But I said, isn't it interesting that you could immediately identify the story from the soundtrack? And I think that there's a soundtrack to our lives that we're supposed to be playing that's in rhythm with God, in rhythm with meaning and balance. And when people see that and hear that, it's an authentic sound that resonates with people. That's the message we've got to get back to, because there's a story being told, and that story has a soundtrack, and we have to be the soundtrack to that. And whether it is our praise and worship before God, or the music that we put out, the stories that we're telling with music, we have to remember that the standard is God himself. And so I, for one, the greatest compliment that anybody could ever pay me is to say, the thing about Chad is he's genuine, or he's authentic, or he's a voice. The gospel writer, John, he said in John chapter 6, said there was a man sent from God named John, who came to baptize. John the Baptist. It says he was the voice of one calling out in the wilderness. And I want to be a voice and not an echo. And so we have so many of these echoes that just kind of sound the same. We need those voices that punch through the smoke. But the only way to do that is to find that standard for authenticity and be authentic and balanced, and find that standard as best we can.
Chad, I'm just curious, when did you first in your life start to get this feeling that there were these subversive forces at work, and that our culture was in danger of heading down the wrong path and being corroded in this way?
Well, I was, I'm 52 years old, almost 53. I was one of those kids that in the 80s, I had to hear the preachers talk about the backward masking and the hard rock music, how it was going to send us all to hell, and how, just the subliminal messages that were there. And I put a lot of thought into that when I was a kid, and I started paying attention to it. And I kind of rode the roller coaster of thinking, okay, they're trying to scare us away from this crazy music that they don't approve of. But then I reminded my parents, I said, well, even, you might say this hard rock music is about rebellion, but I'll remind you that even Frank Sinatra said, I did it my way. Right. That's rebellion. So it's always been there. Right. And then I grew up in the country music, true country music back in the day, the Willie, Waylon, Merle, George and Conway and Loretta and Dolly and Patsy. True country music, if you listen to it, it's not about a girl in cutoff blue jeans today on a diamond plate tailgate with a pickup truck backed up in a pasture to a bonfire while speakers go boom, boom, and she sips a little something out of a Dixie cup, right? That's not country music. Real country music is about cheating. It's about drinking. It's about leaving. It's about dying. It's about tragedy. I mean, it's sad stuff. It's rebellious stuff. So if you look at the roots of music, so much of cultural music, it is rooted in a rebellious theme. But you can take that rebellious theme and you can redeem it, because ultimately that's what it's about. I'm singing this sad song, but there's a resolution to it. It tells a story. So after the three verses and the choruses and the bridge, that song should resolve. It's one reason I don't like jazz music, quite honestly, because it never resolves. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going. So I like music that has an ending, right? So I wanted to come to a conclusion with the drawstring. So for me, Chris, I look back on those days of hearing about music and then listening to music and what resonated with me. I can remember listening to George Jones when I was a 6-year-old boy on a turntable and trying to figure out what he was talking about when he said, I love you till I die. I mean, and he stopped loving her today. And I was like, did he fall out of love? No, the dude died. Like, I mean, that's some tragic, sad stuff. And so I started saying there's this deep resonance of meaning in the music that touches people where logic can't touch them, philosophy can't touch them, speech can't touch them. And so I began to see that this is something that if you pervert that, it can be used in a very dangerous way. It can really push people to a place of rebellion, of anarchy, if you will, if you get away from that balance, if you get away from that story. And so now, if you look at the examples of music out there, it's very confusing. It's very, again, I said the word cacophony a little while ago. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just this abundance of noise being tossed together, whether that is and again, it is true in every genre, honestly. I don't think that by and large we make music good anymore, because music is no longer about the album. People used to do an album and it would be an anthology. You'd have 10 songs and all 10 songs were in order because they were telling an ultimate story. These days, it's no longer about the story of the album. It's no longer about the anthology. Now it's about the playlist and what's trending. So I don't even have to hear the entire song. If I can get 15 seconds of that song out there that grabs people, they'll never hear the rest of the song. They'll never hear the rest of the song. And there's something to me that's atrocious about that. Because when you're more about the playlist and the trending thing, then we've gotten away from what music was really created to do in the first place. And I think that's what we've got to get away from that.
Absolutely.
Chad, you bring up a really interesting point. I think a lot of folks, as they contemplate, what brought this issue to the forefront at this particular moment in time, of course, is the selection of Bad Bunny as the Super Bowl halftime show headliner. And of course, last year we were subjected to Kendrick Lamar, who turned our national pastime into an opportunity to, implicitly lecture, I don't know, white America or systemic America, and make some kind of, racialized statement on the football field. And now, of course, we have a Puerto Rican artist who is making explicit statements admonishing the U.S. General population to brush up on their Spanish and ready themselves to be subjected to music from the lowest element of San Juan society for 15 minutes. And I think that so as people navigate the different aspects of this, of course, the issue of free speech is coming up, and I think that you made a really great point that there are ways for music to engage in and fulfill its one of its historic purposes, which of course is to articulate different aspects and tensions within the human condition, including themes of rebellion and so forth. But, there's a way to go about it. And there's a way to resolve some of those things, or to point the listener or the consumer of that media to some kind of ultimate moral resolution. I grew up in the 80s as well. And one thing that always stood out for me, you would see sitcoms and the kids on the sitcom would, have some kind of dilemma that they were presented with, whether at school or with their friends or a family drama. And at the end of the day, after that 24-minute episode concluded, you had the father sit the child down and impart some kind of paternal wisdom that tied all of the experiences and all the plot points of that episode together in a way that allowed those themes to be explored, drug use, some controversial themes of the time, but then pointed to a lesson that reflected, I think, the shared values that have served all of us so well for so very long. And I think you hit right on it, that it's not so much the discussion being had, but the lack of a purposeful resolution that you have now. And so you see these, instead of this music, kind of going through, taking the listener on a narrative journey and then ending up someplace uplifting, it actually celebrates the corrosive elements. It would be like celebrating, the murder as a cowboy or cheating on your wife, and then leaving it at that, saying, and by the way, the song ending, yep, and by the way, being a wife beating drunk is the way to go, and God bless, and a song ending that way, as opposed to something higher being pointed to. So it's really, really, I think we're right to be extremely concerned.
Well, and there's a misinterpretation, right, of why this Bad Bunny thing bothers people. It's not because he's Puerto Rican. I mean, I've been told over and over again, "Wow, you're a white guy. You care." I don't care about that stuff. I mean, I spent 15 years in Nigeria, for crying out loud. I don't care what the color of somebody's skin is. And if you look at the last 15 Super Bowls, very few of them were, quote, white. So it's not that, it's what he represents, right? And what I believe that it represents is the NFL is going to continue to pander to, they're strategically pandering to the things which, well, I'll put it this way: they're going to go after the, quote, people that are perceived as victimized, oppressed, or marginalized, right? That's what they're going to do. Never at any time are you going to see them trying to put something out there that represents people that have traditional values. They're never going to go after people that have values like you and I do. They're going to go after these folks that represent this new kind of celebrity that profit from American type of capitalism and free market economies, but yet they hate the culture that made all of that possible. So when you got Bad Bunny, who says, I don't want to ever perform in the United States ever again, but yet you're going to take the money from the Super Bowl to do that, the world's largest stage, all the while preaching a doctrine, philosophy, and message that says we hate the country that's providing this freedom and opportunity for me to do that, because ultimately at its foundation, that country must be bad. That is where I draw the line and say, you can't have that. And these protesters out there, whether they're anti, whatever they are, pro-Palestinian protesters or the pro fill in the blank anti-ICE protesters, all of those people have been taught that America in and of itself, its history, is evil. America is not evil. America's history is not evil. We have scars, but so does every civilization. So does every country. So does every nation. But we are not evil. In fact, we're the greatest experiment in the history of mankind. Under the providential hand of God, provided more freedom, more opportunity, more liberty, more hands to lift people out of oppression and poverty than any other governmental experiment ever, as long as people have been on the earth. And I truly believe God's blessed this nation. So this apology tour, or this anti-America protest tour that people have in their sentiment out there, they've been brainwashed. They've been rewired by our teachers, academics, our media, our Hollywood, all of this, to learn that America is bad. And when you put somebody on a main stage who can preach to billions of people at once with an American pastime, I might add, that was built by Americans and their values. The NFL was built that way. And you're going to give them the opportunity to preach that level of hate. I'm going to push back on that, because if they would show just a fraction of respect for the country that made their lives possible, but they don't do it. And so that I have a problem with.
Absolutely. I want to add to that too, Chad, that, it's a matter of, there's so many different things that Bad Bunny represents.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be the transgender ideology or his, you know, stance on ICE or his outwardly demonic appearance in so many of his music videos, and just the overall disrespect for our nation, like you just said. Our nation was founded upon, you know, not just capitalism as an ideal, but also the values that we've been discussing through this whole webinar here. You know, that God is the center of our nation. This is a Christian
Mhm.
nation. This is not, you know, something else. And people also tell me, oh, well, you know, I've seen in comments, Chloe, he's a Christian too. He says, you know, God bless, or he mentions God, or whatever their argument is. It's like, well, no, but the values that he's espousing are so far from that ideal. They're so far from what it actually means to follow God as an individual that there's no way you can make that claim. And I think that, you know, our nation was built upon the Christian values. And like John Adams, you know, quoted, and I quote this all the time, but I think it's just so relevant to this discussion,
You ready
is
to?
that
Oh,
our let me mute someone over here, is that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious
Mitch,
people,
you ready to party hard and
and
pally?
it's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And so I
Good.
think that, you know, let me find this person over here real quick. Hang on. Who we got over here? Mute a couple. I thought that was automatic. Oh well, it's okay. Anyway, the point being though is that, you know, when we turn away from that in our culture and we become that any other that John Adams was referring to, we definitely have a massive problem. And I think that Bad Bunny directly represents that other that destroys America. You know, when we become that immoral kind of nation, then our Constitution that upholds the freedoms that we hold dear falls apart very quickly. And so, you know, Bad Bunny coming in here with not just a stance against America as far as maybe a political stance, but also the moral stance he's taking against what we stand for as a nation is extremely problematic. And so I kind of want to get your thoughts, Chad, like, you know, the whole Bad Bunny situation. Yes, expand on that as much as you like to, but also just in general, what do you think about how the music industry has been used to really, I guess, not just demoralize, but to turn away completely from any sense of tradition and the values that uplifted our nation for so long?
Well,
And
anytime
also, who do you
something,
think is responsible? Who do you think is ultimately most
Yeah, that's a good
responsible
one too. Yeah.
for
well,
for this
the
trend?
The
the
decline.
there's a philosophy out there that, you know, we'll call it the New World Order. I don't know, pick a name. But there's a philosophy out there that believes, and it's pretty accurate, that chaos actually leads to the things that these elitists out there they want. So imagine an ant hill. You know, we're filled with this colony of little ants, and then you got this, you know, this big power out there that comes sticks his boot right in the ant hill, and it turns into chaos and confusion. And that's sort of where they want us to live. So if they can keep us divided and keep us arguing about these things that are, they're, you know, they're parts of culture, parts of society, parts of our belief system. There are worldview and paradigm, and they're important things. But like, if they can keep us arguing over the Super Bowl halftime, they can go off and do what it is that they want to do because they've got us
Absolutely.
occupied over here. And you know, while we talk about the basis and philosophy for music and what its standards are and what its balance should be and patriotism and how people should say the right words, and you know, they thrive off of the chaos that comes from that. So ultimately, you know, the NFL, they're not stupid. Roger Goodell, he knows what's going to generate anticipation for the Super Bowl. They've obviously created this whole PR piece to do this because they knew that there's no such thing as bad press. They're going to get more attention for this by creating the arguments and the online debates going back and forth. You know, as early as September of 2025 for a game that's not going to be played until February of 26. So they knew what they were doing in that. Again, at the end of the day, it's the bottom dollar, right? And whether it's Bad Bunny or whether it's Kendrick Lamar or what's the guy now, Zach Bryan, who came out with the song about ICE knocking on your door. And he came out with a statement today saying, you know, I've served my country. You know, I believe in this country. The fading of the red, white, and blue is what he's talking about in the deal. And I read his sort of his blowback, not apology, but his explanation of why he did the song. My issue with that, Zach, is I say you still turned ICE agents into the boogeyman. You still made it about them being Gestapo. I mean, if they're knocking on your door, you're basically turning them into the bad guy here. And I can't get in line with that. So these guys create the controversy so that we'll be the ants that got kicked in the mound and we're running all over each other. Meanwhile, they're setting the brush fire somewhere else that's ultimately going to destroy all of us. I think that, I think we've got to use our platforms and we've got to push back on these things. But I think at the end of the day, we've got to see through the smoke and we've got to see what that bigger picture is, which is what I love about what, you guys are doing and we're doing with Make Music Right is getting back to some foundational things, because at the end of the day, music is a part of your worldview. It's not just about your taste in music, although we have that. It's not just about what my preferences are on my playlist. Music is a part of your worldview, but ultimately, I've got to make sure that my life is one with my worldview. So you guys talked a minute ago about Bad Bunny claiming to be a Christian, or he says, God bless. I hear that all the time. I heard it about Ozzy Osbourne. I don't know these people's relationship with God. I don't know. I can't know. I don't know what Taylor Swift's relationship with God is. I don't know. But I do know that from the old Latin for the word belief, it means by life. So you can tell what somebody's belief is by the way they live their life. And if their life doesn't line up with their belief, then there's a problem there. The word integrity means one. It comes from the word integer, which again is one. If your word is not one with your life, you don't have integrity. And so what we have is we have a lot of artists that don't have integrity. We have a lot of people that don't have integrity. What I'm looking for in my worldview is, first of all, to make sure that I have integrity. Like I said earlier, I want people to say that I'm genuine and authentic. That's the biggest compliment somebody can pay me. That means my life and my words are one. I've lived plenty of life where that didn't line up. And you know what? I lived out of rhythm. I lived with confusion. My worldview now is to find myself in the position where I'm in alignment with what God has for my life. I'm in rhythm of life and I am balanced in life. And so with that, I want to see artists doing the same thing, because again, the Bible says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The word thinks there is the Hebrew word for a gatekeeper. And the word for, or as he thinks in his soul, so is he. The word soul there is your mind, your will, and your emotions. Okay. As a man thinketh in his heart, that's his soul, that's mind, will, and emotions. Literally what that means in the Hebrew is what a man gives the gatekeeper access to into his soul is what he becomes. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. As a man gives access into his soul, so is what he becomes. So if I'm consistently opening my life up to things that don't line up with integrity, that don't line up with harmony and balance and melody and grace-filled stuff, if I'm doing that, if I'm listening to lies, if I'm listening to confusion and chaos, if I'm interpreting life on the basis of the rioters on the street in Portland, if I'm giving that access to my soul, guess what I'm going to become? I'm going to become chaotic. I'm going to become out of rhythm and out of balance. And like I said earlier, if beauty is about balance, then I'm going to become very ugly. Life's going to get very grotesque. And that's why I think you have so many people whose lives just don't make sense, because they've allowed certain things, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it is a belief system of philosophy, negativity, pessimism, whatever. I've often said that a cynic is a passionate person who's tired of being disappointed. There's a lot of cynics out there because they're very passionate, but they've allowed and absorbed the wrong things to come into their soul. And so when I'm opening this up to my soul, I got a problem. But think about what we do with our children. We set our children in front of these screens. They're being entertained by TikTok and Instagram and these reels and these trends and all the things out there. And their souls are just turning into mush. And then we wonder why we can't think critically, or why kids can't read or can't write cursive or don't know how to write a check or don't know how to, take care of themselves. It's really a sad situation. So that's why I say we can look at the nuances of society, the things that make up society. But at the end of the day, what's your worldview so that you can take those little things and make them line up with that paradigm that you have?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say,
I love satellite delays. one thing that struck me, I was over in Europe 2 weeks ago, and I'm driving. I had just visited the home of Luciano Pavarotti, legendary
Mm.
opera singer, and they turned it into a museum. He passed away in 2007, and really moving experience. And anyway, I'm listening to a discussion between Charlie Kirk and Jordan Peterson. And of course, we lost Charlie a few weeks ago, and Chad was so grateful that you have filled in for him and his show and his platform. And one thing that he spoke about was how we think oftentimes of taking the name of the Lord in vain as simply saying, God,
Yeah.
whatever, and damn it, and this and that. Maybe a curse, a swear, in frustration. But there's another manifestation of that they talked about, and that was invoking the name and the spirit of religion and of the Lord towards a pernicious purpose, towards
Yep.
the pursuit of something evil. And it really brings Bad Bunny to mind, of course, because he talks about God being a God-fearing person. Oh, I'm from a religious family in San Juan, and he has the temerity to include some religious symbolism in his quote unquote music. But at the end of the day, he's promoting things that are anything but godly, and it's one of the
Yep.
worst things that you can do. And like you said, it ends up painting a grotesque picture. And this is not just something that I think should be a concern to religious people, people of faith. Religious principles, even if you distill it down from a secular standpoint, still make perfect sense. And somebody who is presenting a distorted idea of religiosity is also presenting a distorted view of logic and reality as well, even from a secular standpoint. And so you should be against it, even on that basis, also. And so I was just curious, Chad, in your own life, you mentioned that, like all of us, you struggled from time to time with aligning, your day to day life with, the principles that you know to be true deep down. And for you, was there a particular turning point or where you just said, you know what, enough is enough? It's time for me to kind of bring my life more fully in integrity with what I really truly believe deep down.
Yeah, and there's been a few of those, Chris. A lot of times people say, I want to point to this one point in life where it did it. Now, for me, it started as a young boy. It happened as a teenager. It happened in my 20s. It happened in my 30s. I've had events, even in the last 2 years that brought me to a place, and all of them ultimately were the same with the same result. It was okay. This is where we are. You have your seasons where, you go into maybe some rebellion, right? You go into some things where it's like, I'm just tired of fighting. I'm just gonna go with the flow of the chaos. I'm gonna let the riptide carry me out. And you start looking for reality in those places. And let me tell you, there's no reality out there. There's nothing but destruction. So I don't care if you're looking for it in the bottom of a bottle or the bottom of a bag of drugs or whatever. You or whatever addiction you may have, sex, pornography, all of these things that people get themselves lost in, bad relationships, whatever. You look for reality in the next thing, and it's not there. Now, as I've gotten older, it's gotten a lot easier for me to take a look at life and say, okay, I got less time to live than I've already lived. If it maps out, that seems to be statistically about right. So now, how am I going to live? Am I going to live in debauchery? Am I going to be a guy that just goes out in a blazing storm and says, okay, I'm just going to live my way? Shake my fist at heaven and say, I'm not going to give an account to anybody but myself. And at the end of the day, watch those consequences come. Or am I going to live in light of eternity? So, I had this episode about 18 months ago where the way I describe it is I felt like the Lord was kind of putting his hands on my shoulders and pressing down and just putting a weight on me. And I was like, what in the world is going on? What's happening here? And in a time of just sort of just weeping, honestly, and crying and just asking God, what are you doing? What are you trying to say to me? I felt like the Lord spoke to me one night, and he said, I was in my living room, and he said, I've made a lot of investments in you as a young man, and now I'm going to make some withdrawals. from you as an older man. And so, in other words, we're not just going to be content to let you smuggle your own soul into heaven. We're going to take some people with you. I love what this message recently has been about. Something Charlie said was, let's make heaven crowded. And so it's one of the things that impacted me to 30 days before the last election, start posting morning prayers every day. I thought I was just going to do that for 30 days up to the election. Here we are a year later. I'm still posting the prayers. A couple of months ago, I felt impressed to add more to my plate. And besides the Chad Prather show, which deals with politics and culture and values. But in the morning, as Chloe said, I started Before the Noise. People can go to beforethenoise.com and see the replays. We're live every morning. That started out as a 15-minute, episode each morning of just devotional thought, working through the scriptures together. And then it turned into an hour because Rumble gave me a live feature spot at that time in the morning, and they want an hour. So, most preachers, and I'm not a preacher, but most of these guys that study the Bible and teach it on the week, they might, prepare one message and deliver it a couple of times on the weekend, depending on how many services their church has. I'm putting an hour together every single day. So you want to talk about just really immersing yourself into the scripture and what I feel like God is saying to people and calling them out. And I'm like, wow. I mean, you talk about wringing the chamois dry. So I'm, here I am. Men aren't designed to talk that much, guys. I'll just tell you that we put our foot in our mouth. Women talk way more eloquently than men do. And so I have a foot-shaped mouth. I can stick it in there with ease. But I'm doing it because Chris, I felt like the Lord spoke to me and said, I'm about to make some withdrawals from you. And the Lord did make a lot of investments in me as a young man, some great mentors, some great spiritual fathers. I was privileged to travel around the world with them, listen to their insight, their knowledge, their wisdom. And now it's an opportunity with this platform. It's a huge, I'll be honest with you, as the world standards look, it's a huge sacrifice. Because I'm using my platforms, which historically and consistently, you can make money off of a large platform. I'm not making any money from any of this. This is not something I'm capitalizing off of. It's a labor of love to do it. And so you look at it and you go, okay, again, you can tell what somebody believes by the way they live their life. I'm trying to say, okay, Lord, I'm trying to be obedient to you in all of these different times where you've met me in my life. Each one of them have been a consistent interaction or revelation. I often say the tattoos on my body are my altars that I've built over the years. Because God did something significant in my life, and sort of like the Abraham did when God revealed himself, he built an altar. Now I can't say anything about this pinup right here. That's not an altar. That was something that happened in Galveston. We're not going to talk about years ago. Okay. But
Galveston.
Galveston. Oh, Galveston. So, but all of those things are kind of a place where God marked my life in a big way. And I think that's ultimately, that's what a relationship with God's all about. I think God's going to consistently reveal himself over and over. And to the degree that we're willing to listen and get in rhythm with him, I think that, and the key is being willing to change. And that's hard to do, particularly for men and particularly for older people as we get, set in our ways. I've often said that living things grow and growing things change, and changing things challenge us. But if you're alive, you're going to grow. And if you grow, you're going to change. And if you change, it's going to challenge. But challenging things lead us to maturity. And so I use the example, when I was a baby, people like to kiss my feet. Now I can't find anybody that want to kiss my feet, right? Because living things grow and growing things change, and changing things challenge us. And so I can't, baby feet are one thing, 52-year-old man feet, whole different story. So I think to the degree that we're willing to walk with God and transform with God, be challenged by God and change with what he's doing in our life, I think it's an effective deal.
Absolutely.
My mother never misses an opportunity to tell me how much cuter I was when I was an infant. She goes, "What happened?
I was an ugly baby.
Boy?
Trust me, I was an ugly baby."
I want to get to some of the questions in the comments here before we wrap up. And this has been so great. So we have a question here we have three of them right now. We have a question from Chris Wilson, who says, this is for Chad, who is a contemporary musician you really respect, and what is a favorite country song of yours that speaks to your faith?
You know what? That's a good question. I'm liking some of these guys that are coming along, and I know I've known them for a long time. like personally known them. In fact, I'll be with Zach Top tomorrow night.
Awesome.
Cody Johnson is an old friend of mine. We're hugely connected, and I will come back to him in a second on the faith thing. There's been some other guys I've been able to spend some time with. Guys like John Rich are close personal friends. All the way to Kid Rock. I try to keep my mind open. There's a guy out there that I just met yesterday. I've been following him for a while. And we were talking about Bradley Jordan, who founded Rock the Country, and he's an old best friend of mine. And he and I got to catch up yesterday, and he was telling me about this young guy named Drew Parker. Drew Parker has written a number of songs with and for Luke Combs. And he's now, his whole heart is using music to bring people to Jesus. And so we got connected yesterday through Bradley Jordan, sorry. And sounds like those names should be switched, right? And but he's got a new song out. It's called Because of Jesus. And I found that and I was like, oh man, this is earth shattering, dude. I love this. So I shared it on my Instagram today. So, I like those folks. I like Shabuzi, right? I've kind of become a Shabuzi fan. I like sort of watching what guys like Jelly Roll are doing, because Jelly Roll is not my type of music. Like, I never understood Post Malone, but now I kind of got into that. And I'm like, that's cool. I like that. Because again, I go back to the old stuff, the old standards. And I'll tell you, a big place where I am these days, it's not contemporary, is getting back into the old hymns. We've started adding those in our live sets. Singing Because He Lives, I Can Face Tomorrow, and doing it with a 4-part or a 3-part harmony. And man, it's amazing to watch people just come alive when you bring those old hymns and those old standards back out and put a new twist on them. So, and on the Christian side of things, Brandon Lake, what a phenomenal dude. I'm trying to get to know him a little bit. But Cody Johnson, I love Cody. Cody's got this phrase he uses. Sometimes I've heard him say it. He goes, "You guys know me well. You've seen me out there with my feathers flying." But at the end of the day, he comes back to the place of his faith. And so he's got some songs out there that I'm like, you know what? If a guy like Cody Johnson can be bold in front of 80,000 people and talk about his faith at the same time, you know what? No reason why I can't do it as well. So that's been I'm proud of those guys for their testimony.
I like that. It's been really cool to see Jelly Roll. I was never a fan. That's still not really my kind of music, but it's been very interesting to see his testimony and where he's come has been, he's come so far, and it's really awesome to see him, take a stance on that in his career, which I know isn't easy in Hollywood, and he's very involved in Hollywood. And so that's very interesting. Kind of, I'm going to skip a question and go back to that one in just a second. Chris here says, Chad, you always talk about standing. We have a lot of Chris's in the chat here. Chad, you always talk about standing on truth, even when culture pushes back on you for it. What do you think that would look like in the music world if artists actually stood up for faith and freedom instead of selling out to Hollywood? I love that.
Well, I think that's a great question. And it's one that years ago when I was represented in Hollywood, my agency, I was with the Gersh agency, and then I was with Paradigm, and my same agent was there, and my management was in Hollywood as well. And I used to say to my manager, man, because I was writing scripts for sitcoms, and I was represented by a lot of folks out there like Lionsgate. And so I sat in all of the boardrooms, all of the conference rooms of all of the executives from every network that's out there, except NBC. NBC would never meet with me because they're that far left and progressively woke. They would never meet with me, but I met with everybody else. And they were snarky, but we had good meetings. And I used to say to my manager, I said, is there a way to push down this wall? And he said, and this is a guy he used to manage Prince. He managed Madonna. He had a show on in the 90s called Mad About You with Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt's very famous, sitcom. That was his show. And he said, there's no way to push the wall down. There's no way to push this wall down. And I said, there's a way. And one of these days we're going to figure that out. I said, because I think that house of cards is built on a fault line, and that wind's going to blow and that wall is going to come down. And I think in recent days, we've seen some of that happen, the push through, the ability to go out with independent artists or some independent labels and do some things in entertainment. Angel Network is doing that with a lot of their movies, and I go down the line. So, yeah, I think music is one of those deals where, and this is something I was going to say earlier, music is no longer about the artist. It's no longer about the artist because they can make an artist out of anybody. You don't even have to have talent. I mean, look, you don't have to have talent. They can make an artist out of literally anybody these days. It's all about who's sitting in the executive's office. It's all about who the marketing and the PR can pull along. So with that, yeah, I think to the degree that if we can find some folks who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to do it my way. This is the way we're going to do it, or we don't have to do it at all. When we find those artists that are willing to do that and make the sacrifice to do it, it's going to be hard because you're going to give up a lot of money and a lot of notoriety. I can speak to that because I literally did it with my own life. I mean, by the world standards, I could be a million times beyond my success now if I would have been willing to bow to what they wanted. But I was never willing to be something different. But I think there is a way to do that. And I think it's going to crumble. I still believe it's a house of cards that's going to fall in on itself because the fault line is bad. It's built on ego. It's built on Satan. It's built on rebellion. It's built on chaos. It's built on self and sin and sexuality and just absolute evil. And I don't think that lasts forever. So I hope some more folks will stand up and say, this is what we stand for, and this is what we're going to do no matter what anybody says.
I absolutely love that.
In addition to this trend that we've seen, as you said, being a function of maybe one of the agendas being as a distraction to allow space for them to control certain things and to find just to exercise control. It's also, I think, just appealing to that base instinct, just out of convenience. It might be the easiest dollar to chase,
right?
In some instances. How do we enforce or exact a financial penalty on these gatekeepers, on these institutions, so that we can hit them where it hurts in the pocketbook? If it's if they're willing to fall on the and rationalize on the sword of laissez-faire capitalism, then how do we use the forces of capitalism to undermine some of these nefarious trends that we're talking about?
That's a good question, Chris. I think we got to stop being reactive and be proactive. And what I mean by that is you look at American Eagle. They came out with the Sydney Sweeney thing, and we were reactive. I mean, we sent their stock through the roof. I mean, they made $1 billion off of that campaign. You look at Bud Light. They trotted Dylan Mulvaney out there, and we responded reactively. The same happened with John Deere. It happened with Tractor Supply. It's happened with all of these different brands. What I wish we could do and what we need to do and what I hope we can do through Make Music Right is get people to proactively start chasing the things that have values and have foundations and standards. Because I think when we do that, we can marshal those forces, like you said, and we use a free market economy as a weapon to actually say, like I said earlier, the Super Bowl, they're never going to say, you know what, we want to target these people with traditional values. They're not going to put Brandon Lake up there. They're not going to put Chris Tomlin up there. They're not going to put Stephen Werder, Chris McWhorter, whatever his name is. I think Stephen McWhorter. They're not going to put these guys up there singing about their faith. They're not going to do that. And that's too much to ask. Right? They'll never do that. But give me somebody. They're not going to do Jason Aldean. They're not going to do pick your person. I mean, they're just not going to do it. So we've got to be proactive about that. And we're real good at reactive. We're not good at proactive.
Absolutely. Here's another good question in here. That's really good, Chad. That's something that Make Music Right is, a pillar of what we're doing here is getting people to be educated on that this is an issue in the first place. And then with that said, instead of reacting to individual situations and happenings in our culture, instead let's start building an infrastructure of our own that we can actually sustain the artists that you mentioned, who actually will be willing to sacrifice, like yourself, like Chris, who will say, you know what, my values and my morals, I'm going to hold that to a higher, standard in my life than just to succumb to what the left is asking for in order to have success or a larger success in a career. So that's something that is crucial to Make Music Right's mission. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Another question, I think 2 more in here that are really good. This one says, hi, Chad. This is from Noah. Hi, Chad. I joined late, so you may have already answered this. How do you see AI shaping the music industry over the next 5 years? And will authentic music creation persist, or will artists trade their identity/work for profit? Why aren't more celebrities speaking out/pushing back on its takeover?
Because they're using it. And they're using it. They're cheating.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that bothers me. I hope we crack down on that. I don't like it. I think it robs the soul of the art. And faith and music. Faith and music, those are two things you can't fake. They share the same DNA actually, because both begin with an unseen vibration. You can't see faith, but you can feel its resonance when it's real. You can't see sound, yet it moves the air and the soul and the heart all at once. The AI stuff, and it bothers me that people can't recognize when something's AI, because both of those rely on trust. Faith, trust that God is good. Music, trust that the next note is going to resolve. Dissonance without resolution creates tension. And when the chord finally lands, there's a peace that returns from that sound. And that's basically what I call a sermon and a sound. AI can't reproduce the soul. And I hope we get away from that. And I hope there's some accountability to it. But as you alluded to, there's money in it, and that's the problem.
I'm going to steal that, a sermon and a sound.
Yeah.
Sermon and a sound. Yeah.
It's great. I think Chad just rewired my brain a little bit, comparing music to God. That's really interesting. That's a really good analogy, and understanding, why I guess it's so powerful too. It has that similar DNA. Okay, Brody here says, what is your advice for independent artists starting out, whether it be getting your music out there, building true connections, advertising on social media that is true to yourself but not unclassy / reliant on controversy, quote unquote rage bait, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a big question. There's a lot to it. I go back to the simplest answer is be yourself. Be real, be true to yourself. Don't sell your soul. Don't do something that makes you feel icky when you lay down in bed at night. Tell your stories. Listen, history is a story. The gospel is a story. Life is a story. We've gotten away from storytelling, and music, it has to be about the story. So you are the only person, as I said earlier, when I said that, God wants a voice or a sound made in the world. You're the only person who can tell that story. You're the only one. And so trust the story. Trust that there's others out there that story will resonate back to them when you tell it. There's this idea that you got to be just like the world, that I've got to get into the TikTok trends, that I've got to get into the Instagram deal. I'll tell you something that's more powerful than a trend, and that is prayer. Pray over what you're doing. Consecrate it to God. I made a commitment when I was 20 years old, that I would never open my own doors. And I said, God, I'm a poor chooser, so I need you to make the choices for me. And trust me when I tell you, I am a poor chooser. I am an impetuous man. I was impatient. Thankfully, with age, I've gotten a little more patient and hopefully a little more wise. But I don't make a single decision. There's a couple of criteria that go into me making a decision. Do I believe God's in it? And I know that because do I have peace if I walk through this door? Is there peace? The Bible says, let peace guide you. Let it be the umpire of your soul. Let it call balls and strikes, okay? So do I have peace if I walk through this? Am I going to be able to honor myself, my family, my children, the legacy of my parents? Am I going to be able to honor my God by doing it? Or is it going to take some explanation? In other words, if I go do it, am I going to have to explain to my kids why I did this? Or are they going to be like, no, that fits with who you are? And the other thing is, am I having fun doing it? Because if it ain't fun, I ain't doing it. I'm just telling you, if it's not fun, I don't want to go do it. Music is supposed to be fun. Art is supposed to be fun. Painting is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be therapeutic. It's supposed to be relaxing. Yeah, it becomes a job, and there's nothing wrong. Listen, God put work in his economy. That's not part of the fall or part of the curse. Adam was working in the garden before he sinned. So the problem was work got contrary after the fall. There was roots and the ground resisted him, but the work I think will work in heaven. So even art is work. But man, wouldn't you love to have the absolute creative ability to go out and work in such a way that you could look back at the end of the day and say, I did that by God's grace and by his help, without any hindrance to it, without any frustration, without any, as Christopher said a little while ago, taking God's name in vain over it because I'm so frustrated. I want to be able to create freely and let that grace. And by the way, grace, let me tell you this. Grace is people say it's the unmerited favor of God. I don't believe that at all. I think grace is merited. In fact, the Bible says in James, it says that God gives grace to the humble and he resists the proud. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and in due season, he will lift you up to those, who have humbled themselves under his mighty hand. So there is a condition to it. But grace is the power of God to do what he's called you to do. That's what grace is. So if God's called you to make that music, if he's called you to be that artist, then let his power be what makes you able to do it, not in your own strength. Remember, they put Saul's armor on David when he was a boy before he went out and faced Goliath. And he said, I can't do it like this, boys. You got to take this armor off of me. And he said, he went before Goliath with nothing more than a sling and 5 stones. So find that sling, find that 5 stones, and let God's grace open those doors for you.
Chad, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on here. This is just, I mean, like I said, you said that women have better words. I don't think that's true in this case scenario. I think you're a lot better than me in this aspect of things. But I am just so grateful to you, Chad, and Christopher, you as well. This has been absolutely amazing, and thank you everyone who joined as well. This will also be out on Make Music Right's website, makemusicright.com. It'll be past events. You can go watch the webinars there, and just get some amazing advice and just good words from these people like Chad. And so, Chad, final thoughts to the audience here before we sign off.
Well, thank you for having me on. I love you both. And to the rest of you in the audience, when the Bible, I'll just give you a final thought because I was just thinking about King David. And David, whenever he wrote those Psalms, that was proof that God actually speaks through a melody because David wasn't just writing poetry. He was kind of scoring theology. He says, sing unto the Lord a new song. And the reason why is because music awakens that part of the soul that words alone can't reach. And it reminds us that life is not random, it's orchestrated. So every drum beat mirrors the heartbeat of creation. Every scale points to symmetry, beauty that can only come from the Creator. And I believe the same God who spoke light into existence also composed the laws of pitch and tone. And when we make music, and hey, when we make music right, we're not just inventing, we are returning. We're tracing the rhythm that's always been there and it's kind of woven into time since the beginning. So I love what we're doing here with Make Music Right. And I think we get our souls involved with it and we're going to have a world-changing movement. So God bless you guys.
God bless you, Chad. And we love you. We're so incredibly grateful you're here on our board with Make Music Right. It is just, like I said earlier, an honor to have you on board with us in this movement. I am so excited about the potential this movement has to really change our culture and change America for the better and bring it back to God, and bring it back to the values that made it once a great nation. And so I think we're still a great nation. We're just in a little bit of turmoil right now. So let's restore it to what it could be. And